enjoyed the book.
Thank you.
American Shamans. That was quite a book. I really just want to get into kind of into the weeds on this kind of stuff with you about Pow Wow and folk magic and
sure
your exploration of it and your experience with it and all that stuff. I mean, this is something that's been really fascinating me lately. Has been this folk magic stuff.
I've been surprised at exactly how people have received it, and I think it's because it has, for many people, a genuine family connection.
Yeah.
It has a heritage connection of all kinds. I mean, even when I was studying it, I had no idea until one Thanksgiving dinner that I had an absolute family connection to it, because it had always been kept private. And it was revealed by my grandmother after a Thanksgiving dinner that her father was a powwow who specialized in animal work. Couldn't do much for humans, but he certainly had a reputation all over Western North Carolina for being able to heal animals with touch.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We just talked recently to Jake Richards. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I don't think so. Names are, I do better with faces than I do with names.
Sure.
Gotcha.
Sure. This was he lives here in Tennessee in Jonesboro, and he's written this book called Backwoods Witchcraft about.
Oh yeah.
He's a real young guy too.
Yeah, he's only like about 22 years old or something like that. But he's written like this great book about it, and it's more just like the Appalachian tradition, I guess, closer to like what in the book you talk about the Granny Woman. I think closer to that tradition, than like Pow Wow.
There is an overlap in all these traditions.
Mm-hmm.
I always get sort of amused at people who were trying to pull it into one little segment and said this is this tradition and this is that tradition. When our ancestors really didn't care if something worked or they learned about something, they just brought it in and used it. I have never seen, even race was no barrier.
Yeah.
And so you had root doctors using powwow.
Right.
You had granny women using root doctor spells. You had powwows using everything. It really is a matter of practicality. These were always, I have very country relatives and ancestors, and they were all extremely practical people, and all very religious people. I kind of got into this in 1974 as looking for something novel to write about in an anthropology class. And this fellow recommended I call this guy down in Beaufort who was a root doctor. Well, I'd heard of root doctors. They were all around the area where I was living with my parents. And they were people you kind of stayed clear of, and you were respectful to them. You know, they were kind of feared and respected at the same time. And so I called this fellow in Beaufort, and after a long interview, went down there and started talking and interviewing him. After I did that for a while, I learned through an article in a magazine that's published, I don't know if it's still published, in the state of South Carolina, called Sandlapper. And there was an article about this man who lived in Lexington. Well, we lived like 10 miles from Lexington, so it sure was a lot easier than going down to Beaufort. So there again, I had this sort of time when I had to convince this person to let me talk to them. And then I was serious about it, and I was not, just some fly-by-night character. And that started the whole relationship with Lee Gandy, who's in the book quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And I stayed more with him than I did with anybody else because he was close. And the things that happened with Lee started out intense and got more and more and more and more intense. I saw some interesting and sort of miraculous things with McTeer, but Lee was a whole nother kettle of fish, so to speak. you had to get used to what went on in his house. You could see anything when you went over there. And I really struggled with it kind of psychologically at first, because I was very anchored in a very rational sense of what reality was. And it took me a while to be able to accept it. That there were things happening that I had no rational explanation for.
Well, Jack, I want to get to that, but I want to just kind of like lay some groundwork here.
Sure.
And to say too, like we've already started, so this is I guess the true start of 2020.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully we'll have a lot of shows this year. In reference to some things that happened tonight in the world. But anyway, so we've got our first guest of 2020. We've got Jack Montgomery. Jack, I met you at here in Nashville at the Aroma G Folk Magic Festival.
Yep.
Just about in October, and I was there doing giving out flyers for the Strange Realities Conference there. And I watched your presentation, was really impressed by it, started talking to you, found out that you knew a lot about Pow Wow, which has something that just kind of came onto my radar really honestly last year, or at least maybe the end of 2018. I did tell you that we have another one of our fellow podcasters, Timothy Renner, who lives in Southern Pennsylvania, who has a podcast called Strange Familiars. And he actually starts off each one of his shows with this snippet from a soundbite from a powwow doctor that his wife's mother interviewed in the 1970s. And until I had like really listened to Tim's show, I had no idea what powwow even was.
It's not something that really the people who practice powwow tend to not be headline grabbers. They tend to operate quietly, almost invisibly.
Yeah.
You have to know somebody to be able to connect with them. They're not in your newspaper, except, by accident or when someone takes an interest in it.
And powwow is one of several of these American traditions that, like you said, do interact with each other, that you go into detail in your book, American Shamans, which is what this is mostly probably going to revolve around.
Right. And I bought the book when I was there.
Yeah.
I told you I would get you on the show and then hit you up to come on. So that's kind of laying the background as to how I met you. And I really wanted to get somebody that was a practitioner of this to really come on and talk about it too. Because like I stated before, folk magic has been something that I've become really interested in. There's a few other people like Tony Kale, who I know you know very well, writing a book with him now, and David Metcalf is another one that's kind of like stoked my interest in this. And David, he hasn't written a book, but he's talked about Santa Muerta, that whole like kind of folk tradition down there in Mexico. So we've kind of covered a lot of this. But to kind of really, like I said, I really wanted to get down in the weeds with you on this. So you gave a little bit of your background and kind of how you got into it. But how did all that kind of lead into writing American Shamans? Like, what gave you the idea to write the book initially?
Well, like I say, originally it was a senior thesis. It became a senior thesis. I won a scholarship with that thesis. But then it just kind of fizzled. Now, I kept up the personal connection to it, but, I sort of moved on with life, and I went to grad school at the University of Virginia, studied Hinduism, but at the same time, I'm sort of keeping this little sideline going, and that's how I met the lady known as Sarah Ramsey in the Granny. Then I became a librarian and was at a meeting, and this man was there at the table with us. Sometimes you go out as a group, And he said, I heard something about you. And he started asking me about this. And he said, I run a small publishing company. I would like to publish on these types of subjects. Would you be interested in writing a book? And I'm like, oh, sure. First thought was like, oh my God, I've got a footlocker full of this stuff. I don't know where it is, but I'll find it, of notes and tapes. So I kind of went home and wrote him an outline as best I could. And I thought I can cover 3 traditions and introduce 3 traditions in a way that perhaps has not been done. I wanted to be very responsible, and I wanted to let these people come through and sort of speak their own, tell their own story. So that's why there are transcripts in that book of conversations, which were taken off of little cassette tapes that I was hoping, praying wouldn't break.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
Because they were so old.
Yeah, you'd recorded them in the 70s, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And every second was like, please don't break. Please don't break.
Did you manage to get them all transcribed?
Most of them. I discovered that I had a young lady friend who had, when I wasn't around, had gone and recorded music over some of them.
Oh. So like you go to listen to it, and there's like Fog Hat is like on the
yeah. Oh yeah. And I said some really unkind things and went through the rest of them, and I found that there was enough there to make to do what I did in American Shamans with. But one thing I'd love to do is to maybe transfer those things, if I can, get some good recording engineer and transfer some of that stuff into disc.
Yeah, I was about to ask you that, whether you'd put them on the disc or like made them into MP3 or something like that.
Absolutely. I'd like for people to be able to hear Big Andy's voice.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
You were kind of like doing the Smithsonian Folkways thing, going
Yeah.
out there and getting the field recordings.
It's funny you mentioned that. That was sort of the idea behind it.
Yeah.
Because I was very much into the folkways music and all that kind of stuff, and how the father and son Lomax went down and did all that absolutely fantastic work.
Ways of preserving those things.
Yes. Because, after all of the people that I'm talking about in the book are now dead.
Yeah.
Now there's another fellow named Mike Harmon. He was Lee Gandy's other pupil. And we reconnected after 40 years, and now go visit each other every year. And we sit and talk in his 1870 house. And last November we did had some adventures. We started to look for sites in Lee's book, Secrets of Hexenmeister. We started to go look for those certain things, and by golly, we found one. And it found us. And we weren't totally expecting that one, but it happened. And it shows that there's still a lot of this quite alive, still very vibrant tradition.
Do you want to go into what that was, or?
We went looking for a spirit, a nature spirit called Old Bunkum. Now that's what the folks around there called him. He was a mischievous spirit. He lived in a certain section of Lexington County. So he said, why don't we go find the old house? And I said, sure, let's go. So we all piled into his truck with his great big old dog, who's very active. And we got to this one point. The house was gone. The house was absolutely gone. We drove into a wooded stretch, and all of a sudden the dog got dead silent, sat down, wouldn't move its head, looks nervously from side to side. And it was like we had all gone from midday sun to late afternoon, almost dark, in a matter of seconds. And it wasn't that there were trees over us either. We weren't driving in a covered area. but it was like something had settled all over us. And we just didn't say anything. And I said, do you feel that? He goes, yeah, what is it? I said, I don't know. So we kept driving. All of a sudden, it's like we drove out of it. And everything was normal again. I said, do you want to turn around? Let's go back through, see if it comes back. Sure enough, right back into it. It was a presence, and you could feel it physically. I don't know if it was electromagnetic energy or what, but in the last pass, we did it 3 times, and then we thought better of keep. We're also sort of annoying the people who lived in the area. But it was like looking at houses in the dark. It had impacted our visual ability. And I saw an animal run in front of the car, and I said, look at that, look at that. And he goes, what? And it vanished right in front of us. At the same time, he was hearing something flapping its wings at the side of the truck, like a bird sailing past. So we got out of there. He said, I don't want to go back in there. I said, no, I don't either. I can't imagine living in that stretch of territory. But whatever old bunkum, he's still there. Because whatever this is, it messes with people's heads. And it's something I think almost geophysical. I'd like to go back in there with some sensitive equipment and see if we couldn't figure out if it is like geomagnetic or what. But I tell you, it impacted both of us. And we kind of turned around and went to his house and said, okay, what the hell happened here? What did we just experience? And we shared with each other what we did. He's gone back since, and it happened again. I said, do you want to get out of this truck on the 3rd pass? He goes, no.
Wow.
Because this is one of the few places that scared Lee Gandy.
Really?
It took a lot to scare Lee Gandy.
And you said this was a guy who was used to almost 24/7 strange phenomenon.
In spirits.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of some stories that I've heard. Some other people have said about coming home on these like dead spots in the woods, and then all of a sudden, like all the noise just ceases, and it's like these weird, eerie points in the forest. It reminds me of that.
And related to cryptozoological things, like you said, you saw the animal. He thought he heard wings flapping.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. For like a Mothman-esque kind of thing. Yeah.
Somewhat, yeah. And I have no explanation whatsoever for what happened to us. He went back with himself. He said the dog got dead silent again. Dogs, it's good to take a dog if as long as nothing happens to it. But they pick up generally a little bit before you do. And when he got dead still, and that was unusual for that dog. We both knew something that was going on. So that was our little unexpected adventure. I imagine he will take some other people in there and find out if they experience the same thing. It's interesting, too, that we were each experiencing it different. But both of us felt this sort of heavy, mist-like presence all over us. It was like sitting on your face, like a wet cloth.
Mm.
Like I say, I don't have any explanation for it.
Strange.
Well, Jack, let's talk a little bit about these, and I definitely want to get back to the strange experiences and some of the experiences you have with Lee Gandy, but just to kind of lay some groundwork, the concept of the shaman and how that. Well, first of all, how do you define shamanism, and then also how do these traditions like Pow Wow, root magic, and the Granny Woman in the Appalachian traditions, how do these fit in with the concept of shamanism?
For me, the shamanism, and I've always liked the definition, is a grammar of the mind. It is the ability to alter one's consciousness in an automatic and willful manner. to be able to achieve things that aren't normally available to our everyday distracted consciousness of modern life and modern media, the overstimulation that we normally live in. Most of the people that I met spent most of their time in a rural setting, in quiet, sometimes in Lee's case, mostly in solitude. His wife worked, but she was gone most of the time. And I think it's a heightened awareness. It's an awareness. Now, I know where shamanism comes from. I know where the term comes from. But it was the best way I could describe some of the behaviors that I saw practiced. The healing behaviors of stroking, the washing behaviors that you do to start removing negativity from people, the chants, the use of words as a vehicle for energy transfer. In Lee's case, the working in multiple dimensions, the reaching out to one's inner self through lucid dreaming. That would be one of the first things that was to lucid dream. And early on, not everybody takes to this. And it's really nothing if you're not inadequate if you can't make it happen. But if you can do so, you can start to develop on that. It's sort of like a starting point. You play a little song on your piano or whatever, and then you move on to more complex songs. That's a good analogy of how you develop it. But the concept of magic is all around us. We are all living in a magical world surrounded by spirits all the time. We're all immersed in it. We're not separate from it. But we've shut ourselves off from it in most cases so that we can do ordinary things. It's kind of sad when you see someone who's gotten completely into it and can't turn it off.
Yeah.
And they're really sort of helpless people who are running around seeing spirits everywhere and being tormented by them. And I feel sad for those people. But you do have to learn to turn it off, to shut it down.
Yeah. For instance, you talk about the granny woman in the book that she said that she saw people constantly, ghosts and such.
Yeah.
Spirits.
It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant to walk into somewhere and you can feel someone's presence around you.
Yeah.
Because they will. They're there. They're there. Fortunately, I have a wife who is basically psychic as well. And there are many times we love to go in old houses and tour, historic homes in the sort.
Right.
But we've gone into a couple of them and going, okay, don't stay. This is not a good environment. You can feel when it's not right. And I think a lot of our ancestors had these simple little skills. Mm-hmm. And they knew when something was there, and they could sense when it was hostile or friendly.
So another aspect to this is that these people who become shamans, what you call shamans in these different traditions, right, they have a social function too.
Absolutely.
Within the respective communities.
One thing that was always interesting to me about them is the social tightrope that they walked. They could be the hero 1 minute, and if something went wrong, they were the scapegoat. And right, there are multiple instances where someone who had been trusted for their entire life, something went horribly wrong, and they got blamed for it. And all of a sudden, they were the villain. So in terms of the societies they lived at, they tended to be peripheral people. Certainly Lee Gandy was peripheral. He was respected. He was also feared because he'd done a few things that people attributed to him. And there was one where he got mad and cursed this apple orchard and the guy who was fussing at them for picking up apples. And well, the apple orchard died, and eventually so did the guy. Well, that gave him a pretty fearsome reputation in the community.
Now, did people think that he was responsible for that, or was it more than just like possibility that just happened?
The incident was well known in the community.
Yeah.
And when the apple orchard literally withered away in a matter of one season, and then the guy lurched up in church and fell over, they put it together that Lee had something to do with it. And I asked him, I said, "Did you do this?" And he goes, "I don't know."
Wow.
He
couldn't even tell himself whether he did it or not.
No, he said, "I don't think so. I didn't mean to. I was angry, but that, someone who gets to his level of development has to be very careful with their emotions,
because you could put that intention, and then it could cause that effect."
Yes. His grandfather got mad when lightning struck a tree outside their house and scared Lee as a child, and he yelled at the lightning, said, "Just try to flash one at me." Next instant he was dead. That's the other thing I try to always stress to people when you're dealing with true authentic American folk religion, is this is dead serious stuff. People do not, I say people don't, honestly, do not play with this. Have a commitment, have a serious nature towards it, have a respect for it, because it will mess you up.
But don't be flippant about it. Yeah.
Don't be fluffy bunny.
Yeah.
That ain't gonna happen. That's not gonna work for you at all, especially if you get into the whole. And there's a big trend now of people who go out to haunted houses and, run around screaming and hollering and.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's pretty ridiculous stuff, but it's also pretty damn dangerous. You can bring something home with you that you can't wash off, or you can wash it off.
And I've heard plenty of stories of people that have done just that, not meaning to, but bringing some kind of attachment back with them that causes a lot of havoc in their lives.
Seances are another thing. It's not play.
Yeah.
Ouija board is like the old, back in the 70s when they'd have a big house party and throw open the front door and anybody walked in. And sure enough, somebody stole their stuff. And you're thinking, how'd you get that kind of stupid?
Right.
And playing with this kind of stuff in a non-serious manner bring the same effect right down on your head. I've seen it happen.
So these people who occupy these shamanic roles, they serve as kind of like a bridge between the community and the spirit world?
Yeah, they're like mediators.
And then also healing and guidance, prophecy, things like that.
That's a big part of the role. J.E. McTeer called himself the poor man's psychiatrist. And a lot of the people that he saw as clients didn't trust conventional psychotherapists. He never tried to dissuade them from going. He never tried to dissuade anyone from going to a medical doctor. But if they didn't believe that, he would talk to them. I watched a woman, Pow Wow, counsel with a young lady who had just broken up with her marriage. And that's a lot of the stuff they dealt with was very mundane. Divorces, cheating husbands and wives, that kind of stuff.
But those are things people care about.
Yeah. That to me is the appeal of American folk religion. It deals with basic life. It's there to help you through your marriage dissolution. It's there to help you if you've got some kind of thing in your house that's making your life a living hell. It can range all up and down there, all and up down the spectrum of events, but it's all your life. I had a client this past month who called from the West Coast, and she was having some real difficulties. I can't go into the particulars of the case, but I packed up a box of protective things to send to her, and sent them to her to try and secure her, at least her bedroom environment, because that's where you're the most vulnerable. And apparently she got them, and then we talked about how to use them, how to start protecting yourself, about bathing every night before you go to bed, especially if you do any kind of like ghost hunting or stuff like that. You must not go and lie down and go to sleep, because you're just lying down with all this stuff on you or attached to you. And it can be really bad stuff can happen to you. And that's what she was experiencing. Like I say, I don't want to go into the particulars, but everything I do is free. Absolutely free. There's no charge for anything I've ever done.
Right.
And that's a powwow tradition. Now in hoodoo, there are plenty of people who charge for what they do. But I've always preferred to keep the powwow ethic of, it's all God's will. I'm just a connecting wire, so to speak.
Yeah. It's not the personality. It's God doing it through you. Yeah.
And I'm not about to make a buck off of that.
I wanted to talk about this the concept that you have in the book about concept of the kind of like illness and sickness as being an imbalance, and those three types: natural, spiritual, and unnatural.
Yes.
And I feel like that's very important in kind of understanding these practices. How the powwow doctor would respond to those.
Well, the first thing you always do in a treatment is you sit down and talk. And it sounds really bad to use this term, but you penetrate or phase into the person psychically. They don't know you're doing it, but you do it. And all you can get is disjointed impressions. But given what you're saying to them in the dialogue that you're engaging with them, it starts to give you a picture of what they're really going through, whether they're doing this to themselves, or if they have some sort of physical illness that, for goodness sakes, a shot of antibiotics will take care of. Or do they have a projected intrusion? Do they have something in their environment that is attacking them, either projected from a person, knowingly or unknowingly, or is it something like a spirit, like and this has happened, where a person dies and they've had a bad relationship with their parents or something of that nature, someone like that, and they start having certain illnesses. They start having the illness that the parent had. They're starting to manifest the symptoms. That's when you can go in and do, say, a taken off and help them to remove it so that they can get some relief. And then you follow up with them and you counsel. You dispose of, when you remove something, you take it and you dispose it. Then you come back and you give them, I usually will provide a protective charm along with some instructions for taking care of themselves. And this is how powwows have operated for a long time. Most of them are very good, simple folk who are just out there literally trying to help. There's a great story. This is not in the book, but there was a couple named Reuben and Rosella Rock. And I found it very strangely in a book in the library. As I opened up the book and I was looking through it, it was about Pennsylvania, this news clipping fell out. I kid you not, this really did happen. And I pick it up and it's about this woman who had her husband disinterred because his spirit was in her house telling her he didn't want to be buried in his military uniform.
Okay.
And a powwow said, you've got to dig him up. I've got to bless him. and then you can put him back, but you can't put him back in that uniform. And a judge, kind of must have shook his head, but he granted the legal thing to dig him up. And they got the uniform off of him and burned it, put him into some regular clothes, reburied him. The Pow Wow washed him, which is interesting. The Pow Wow washed the corpse to get all of the neutrality back into the corpse, laid it back down. Everything was fine from then on.
So, but I guess before, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, before we get further into some of the particulars, can you, since we're already on Pow Wow, can you give kind of a general overview of what Pow Wow is and where it came from, some of the general history?
Yeah, kind of the history. And of course, definitely going to need to mention Long Lost Friend. That's another.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Pow Wow came from basically it was a European practice along what's called the Palatine area of Germany. A lot of the people there were oppressed by all the continual little wars that they had. Germany was not united at that time. At the same time, for instance, in South Carolina, the planters in the Low Country wanted something in between themselves and the runaway indentures and the Native Americans in the Upcountry. So they actively started to recruit these people to come over and fill in the middle part of the state. And they knew the Germans were very responsible, solid people. So they brought them over literally by the thousands and put them in the middle of the state, settled them into their little towns, and then promptly forgot about them. Well, they provided the barrier that was necessary, but they also kept their practices from Europe in there, and they kept their German language. You can divide the state of South Carolina into three sections, and mid-state is where all of this was. The low part of the state was where the hoodoo was, because you had the rice plantations and all of the African Americans who were brought in the condition of chattel slavery. And in the upstate, you had a lot of Scots-Irish who had fled indenture, and a lot of the upstate area seemed like nobody went up there, so they were safe once they got up there, even if they ran from their indenture. But in that mid-state area, in a place called the Dutch Fork, there were people who fell right back into those old practices from Europe. And there are, in fact, people in Germany and Austria today that we have communicated with who show a remarkable similarity in some of the things that they've done, are doing in Pow Wow. Some of the chants are almost identical. I remember talking to an Austrian man who went with his grandmother as a child to feed the trolls at a waterfall.
Interesting.
And all of this was very pre-Christian. In 1906, one of the early researchers talked about the Mersberg charm. Do you know the Mersberg charm?
No.
The Mersberg charm was used for sprains. And it's one of the few where we have the full pagan version, and then when it was Christianized. And in the pagan version, it talks about Folin, Woden went to the wood, there was Baldur's coat, and his foot was wrenched. And it talks about Frua charmed it as Vola, her sister, and the Woden charmed as well he could, as the bone wrenched, the joint wrenched, the blood wrench, bone to bone, blood to blood, joint to joint, as they were glued together. Now, take that pagan charm and Christianize it, it become our Lord rode, his foal's foot fell a slade. Down he lighted, his foot lighted, bone to bone, sinew to sinew, flesh to flesh, heal in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So there were a lot of cases where that pagan practice got Christianized, those traditions got absorbed, and the whole area of the Dutch Fork really didn't open up until the 1950s. So you had all over 100 years there where it just, and I mean, this was not only in South Carolina, but North Carolina, in Georgia, wherever the Germans were. And you had the long lost friend that came out in I want to say 1803, and it's never been out of print.
John Homan, I think was the name.
John George Homan.
Yeah.
And some of it was a book of incantations. The words themselves, honestly, are not what makes it happen. The words are vehicles for your projected energy. The secret to folk healing sounds remarkably simple, and that it is your ability to call forth and project energy towards a source. So if you have a bruise, you go, bruise thou shalt not heat, bruise thou shalt not sweat, bruise thou shalt not run, no more than the Virgin Mary shall bring forth another son. And you make the sign of the cross 3 times with your thumb. The famous one about burns. 2 angels came from the north, one named Fire, the other named Frost. Frost said to Fire, go away, in the name of Jesus, go away. It was for, have you ever read Holman's book?
I have not read the book, no.
It's remarkably mundane. It has recipes on how to make wine, how to do certain things, and very practical information. And then in the midst of all this, it'll have these other things about how to spellbind a thief. And like I watched a healing up in Pennsylvania one time where a child had fallen, busted their mouth open. And the father appeared at the door. Poor little thing was squalling and bleeding all over herself, and the mother was trying desperately to calm it down. He walks over, he says, can I help her? The mother just goes, here. He takes the child, he lifts his hand up over her face, and she goes limp like a dish rag. And I'm sitting over there and I go, I gotta see this. So I get up and I get like inches from him because I can see him whispering, and he's doing in German, and he's going Heila Heila Hinka direkt Mari ist da alles recht, which is holy, holy, holy chicken shit. Tomorrow morning it will not hurt. It's basically what it is. They use the term chicken dirt. Tomorrow morning it won't hurt. And I swear to you, I watched that wound close. I saw skin form over it. And the child's just lying there like it's completely asleep.
That actually happened to you too, right? 'Cause didn't you have a burn or something that you had to heal yourself?
Yeah, I burnt the daylights out of myself. And I thought, well, if you're going to do it, here it is. Here's your chance, buddy. Let's see how well you can do this. And I think the thing of it is you slip out of normal consciousness. And that's how it's done. It happens in that little in-between world. It's the same world that you see the spirits in. Like when I'll encounter a spirit, I have a signal that always happens. I don't know why, but it does. Everything goes dead silent. And that's my clue, like, pay attention, something's about to happen. And I realized in that truck with Mike, everything went dead silent. It means I've slipped out of normal consciousness. I'm in that shaman-like state. It's where the healing takes place. It's where the spirits are seen. It's where the communications happen.
First and foremost, it's about achieving this different state of consciousness, and that state of consciousness allows both the healing or other powers and enables it.
Right. It allows your intent to move.
Okay.
And if your intent can move, then you've got a responsibility to use it wisely. Because, you have to be careful with things like anger. You have to be careful with things like lust. I have seen people Now, the classic case is spectrophilia, where you'll have people that will use their altered consciousness to engage in um, physical relationships with spirits. And it can happen. It is extremely dangerous to your mental health. When Lee would go into one of his trances, usually to try and find somebody, that's just another shamanic activity. I remember I would sit with him, and I had water, salted water, holy water, so to speak. And if I saw him in distress, I'd begin to wash his face and his hands and help bring him back. Because not even he was impervious. You need someone to help you when you do that kind of stuff. Because there's a real hazard. Something can jump into you when you leave. Now, to most people, thank goodness, this sounds just like crazy stuff. And you don't let them think otherwise. Because if people, I know we went to a lecture, this is a good example. We went to a lecture where Lee was giving a lecture about Pow Wow and folk magic. And I saw these guys come in and sit at the back of the room. And I had a feeling about him that wasn't good. But all of a sudden, he began to talk really nuts, saying really stupid, crazy things. And people were kind of looking at each other like, what the hell happened to him? So the talk soon ended, and we got in the car to take him home because he didn't drive. And I said, what the hell did you do that for? Everybody's going to think you're crazy. He said, that's exactly what I want them to think. Do you see those men at the back of the room? I said, yeah. He said, they were wanting me to do something very bad. And better they think I'm some lunatic who can't tie his shoes than come after me demanding that I do something for them.
Yeah, and misuse his abilities.
Yes.
Yeah. Jack, what's the relationship between Pow Wow and Christianity? How essential is that to Pow Wow?
You can't. Do you know what the term Oglave means?
No.
It's German heathenism. And I used to have some friends who were very much into that, and they wanted at times to say, they would say things like, we have to get all these Christian things out of Pow Wow and return it to its pagan roots. And I said, well, you can certainly try to do that, but it won't be Pow Wow that you have. Pow Wow is intrinsically tied to its Christian roots. And you really got to do a hard jump to try to make it something else. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, I have also had clients who were Wiccans. And for them, I don't use the words in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. I'll use it in the name of the Maiden and the Mother and the Crone. And guess what? It works the same.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting in that there's so many people, European descended people here who are really searching for a direct connection to the old ways, and they're kind of going about it really intellectually or abstractly or with movements that are a lot more recent, when there actually is these traditions that have direct connections to the old world and to the old ways, though they are syncretic and have elements of Christianity, but those are right here.
Yeah, that's true. The one thing I've seen, Pow Wow doesn't have the kind of following that Hoodoo does. Uh-huh. And the reason being is money. You cannot make money and be a legitimate Pow Wow. Now, people can give you food, or they can always tell people, if you want to do something to thank me, do something nice for someone, or give to your church, or do something positive for someone else. share a kindness with someone. That's all I require. But the hoodoo doesn't have that kind of barrier. You can make an awful lot of money, and people like Stephanie Robinson, also known as Dr. Buzzard, made a ton of money being a root doctor. He drove a Cadillac during the Great Depression. He built a church for his community. People like Jim Jordan helped with finance schools. So these people were powerful in their community, and yet their money came from the practice of magic. Pow Wow doesn't really have that component. You either like doing it, you find a spiritual comfort in it, as I do, and as some of the others do, but you're not going to ever legitimately take money from people for anything.
Well, I guess
people
it's,
can buy
yeah.
the book, but if I do anything from it, it's free.
Since you've mentioned it, I guess it'd be a good time to start exploring hoodoo, which is another of these three traditions that you explore in the book. Can you give kind of a background for what hoodoo is? And I understand it is having quite the revival right now, too.
We are indeed having a revival of hoodoo. It's a very, it of course has African roots, West African roots. It is a product of the ugly process of chattel slavery. Many of these people were brought, especially from the Angola area, into, say, South Carolina, because they knew how to grow rice, and rice was a huge crop for many, many generations. So they brought these people in. They were resistant to the malaria, which could devastate people who weren't resistant to it, and they set them up in slavery. But they didn't really take care of them beyond the herbs and things that they came over with, knowing how to use. And so the root doctor became a powerful person even within slavery. And most of the early slavers did not try to Christianize. And this is the difference between hoodoo and voodoo. When there were 2 basic points of entry for slaves. One was Charleston, South Carolina. The other was New Orleans. When they brought them off the ship in New Orleans, there was a priest standing there baptizing them, which made them quasi-human in the eyes of the church and put them under the Napoleonic Code. However, in the Carolinas, Georgia, and that area, they were just property. They were little more than farm animals. So it took them a long time to realize and start to Christianize these people. So you had a very fertile ground created for the survival of African traditions.
And also in New Orleans, the whole idea of voodoo being the syncretism between the West African religions and French Catholicism too. So you have that element entering into that you don't have in South Carolina.
Absolutely.
Or in the South, yeah.
And in some ways, the animistic traditions of West Africa remained pure as a result. It's a world of spirit. It's a world of, but it's not a world of gods. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? In New Orleans, it's a world of gods that took on the form of Catholic saints. But in the Carolinas and Georgia, it's pure animistic spiritism.
And its larger cosmological view is just more of a kind of duality between God and the devil.
Right. Now that did come in once the Christianization began.
Uh-huh.
And it became like you use the word syncretism. That's an excellent word to use. It became a form of Christianity, but then Civil War happened. And a lot of these people were simply abandoned, especially the ones out on the Sea Islands. Nobody even went out there for a long time. And they fell right back into what they did before. After all, nobody else was looking after them. And that's called the heyday of the root doctor, is that post Civil War period. That's when the greats were around, like Dr. Buzzard. And anywhere African people moved, it was there with them. Now, one other thing about this, whites practiced it too. There are images of white root doctors. It's a lot more charm oriented, if to use a concocted word. There are a lot more physical herbs used for strictly magical purposes. Did either of your parents give you buckeyes to carry when you were
No.
a child? Guess not.
No.
Do you know what a buckeye is?
No, I've never.
A buckeye is a naturally occurring nut, but to carry one protected you from evil. And I remember being given them as a little boy to carry around, and I didn't like them because if you fell on them when you played, it hurt.
Okay, yeah, I never got that as a kid, but I have heard of that. Yeah, that you mentioned what it is. Yeah.
And people would create their own little poultices. Grandma would put a mustard plaster on your chest. God knows that was awful, but it it was miserable. And then put a shirt over you, like, I'm dying in here. But though the healing and all those little remedies were all still apart, and they were practiced by whites and blacks alike.
And like you said, in contrast to Pow Wow, it wasn't necessarily against making money from it. So it was also kind of commercialized, right?
Right. It commercialized very quickly. For instance, Aunt Carolyn Dye, Arkansas healer. Not Arkansas, what am I saying? Yeah. She was actually from South Carolina. She moved across the river from Memphis to Liberty, Arkansas. She was a spiritualist, like a lot of them. The spiritualist movement had a big effect on both Pow Wow and Hoodoo. And Aunt Carolyn Dye was a spiritualist. She was a seer. She became so renowned that literally they had a train car called the Aunt Carolyn Dye Special that would bring people over by the trainload every weekend. Now she was like many hoodoos. She didn't charge directly, but she had 400 people sitting in her front yard on a Saturday afternoon. Nothing wrong with selling them their lunch.
Right. Set up a lemonade stand or something. Yeah.
Yes, she did, and she made a ton of money doing so.
This is about when? Early 1900s?
Yes.
Okay.
She was so highly respected that even government officials would sneak over there and seek her counsel. So in that way, she was similar to Marie Laveau in that Marie Laveau knew everything that was going on in New Orleans because she had a network of hairdressers. And so she knew when someone came to her door, she knew what family they were from. She knew exactly who they were about and what their troubles were. And they'd walk away absolutely stunned with amazement as to how she knew all this about them. And it made her legendary, just as it did Aunt Carolyn Dye. But I'm told that Aunt Carolyn Dye was a very genuine practitioner, believed very much in the spiritual goodness of what she did. None of these people would have thought they were doing anything harmful. There were ones that would practice harmful hoodoo. And it's a series of practices. The guy who I met first was named James E. McTeer. And he was a high sheriff professionally, the youngest in the nation when he took over from his father. So now think about how this might go over in a court today. He realized the importance of what he learned as a child, which were these practices. He worked them into his law enforcement to get a confession, to scare the bejesus out of people. None of this would work today, but it worked for him. And he was very charismatic. I watched him. My first inclination that there's something more than just showmanship going on was he had introduced me as his colleague from Colombia. And I was sitting in a chair, and he was working on this woman, drawing a spirit out of her. And he's running his fingers. He had huge hands, and he was running his fingers up her back, pulling this thing out. And I got curious, and I thought, I got to see this. So I went over there, and his hand brushed against me. And I swear it was like sticking your finger in a light socket.
Oh.
Pow!
Huh.
And I kind of stumbled over and sat down in the chair and said, holy crap, what just happened here? And that's when you go, wait a minute, there's more going on than I realized. But later on, he said, did you brush up against me? I said, yeah. He said, don't do that. That's not safe.
So Jack, when you started on all this journey, and when you met Lee Gandy and all this, and you started meeting these people, I mean, were you looking at this kind of from an anthropological student's way of like, this is an academic study that I'm doing, and then it just became much more intensely personal for you as time went on?
I kept desperately trying to remain academically objective. And finally, I realized that if I did not go native, and that's the term for it, if I did not go native and drop some of this, I would never get inside the real practice. I would stay at the periphery. I would be descriptive, but I wouldn't feel it.
Right.
I wouldn't experience it to the depth. So at a point, I remember realizing, and Lee helped me with this. He said, you either have to be able to cope with this, or you need to go. He said, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. He said, but, you need to come to terms with it, because you're on a journey now. And you can walk away right now. But once you enter, it's not going to be easy to walk away. And he was right. He was absolutely right. It takes a level of commitment. It takes a willingness to endure the ridicule sometimes, or the poking fun at you for what people see as superstitious silliness. But I think that's almost true of anyone who seriously pursues any sort of spiritual or religious tradition. You're going to find yourself separate from the fella or the gal who spends her afternoons in front of the TV. And they're not going to pick up on what you're doing. They're not going to understand it. So you learn to sort of be one way for those that will understand, and one way for those that don't. Don't try to hurt anyone. I had an interesting experience I'll share with you. I was giving a lecture, and afterwards this African professor came up and he says, you have helped me. And I thought, oh, in what way? And he goes, my father was the village oracle. He said, the things you've been saying about hoodoo have reconnected me to my home. And I thought, well, I'm very glad. Thank you very much. He says, I'm not going to feel funny about this anymore. I thought, well, good for you. Go and embrace yourself. Go and embrace your heritage. And that's what I always tell people, like, you'll find out that grandma did little things. Grandma believed little things. One lady told me one afternoon, she said, and I love the way this always starts. She said, they say you know some stuff. Okay, what about? Well, it's kind of like magical stuff. Yeah, okay. I found a room behind my mother's closet as I broke down her house. There's an altar in there. There's all this stuff. I don't know what to make of it. None of us ever knew she was doing this. Really? What are you going to do about it? I don't know. I said, did you feel different about your mother? She said, yes, I realized there was a part of her I never knew.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of things that people come up with you and will talk to you about it. I had a college professor that said, and they sneak up and kind of look around like, well, I don't know if nobody's around to hear me say this. And she says, when I was a little girl, I fell into a cauldron of scalding water. I was going to be disfigured, but Mama took me to Auntie, who blew across my face. And the next morning it had all healed. Now, what do you make of this? I don't know. How does a child know that what's being done for it is magic? They don't. So something's happening.
Right.
Something's taking place.
And that was a point that you make in the book as well, where you talk about, because that's usually the one item used to kind of say, well, this is the psychological effect on people, that it makes them feel better with these rituals that are done. But then how does that equate to these other healing traditions that are being also used on animals? How does an animal know? You know, and then
the animal didn't.
That starts to kind of fall apart once you bring that whole thing in to say that there's another force that is through that person that is external being channeled. I want to talk about Lee Gandy, because he is the most interesting figure in the book for sure. And there's so much to him. And
there is.
A few things that stood out to me was, well, his boys. I guess you could say that these were like the spirit guides. And him taking you to outside to tell you about elementals and about how basically you're getting into the fairy realm and folklore, and how that's even a connection there with Pow Wow, which I had no idea that was a part of it. And this kind of idea of parallel worlds that he talks to you about in the book.
Did the whole ultra ever heard that term? The multidimensional dimensional beings.
Yeah. The ultra terrestrials.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. John Keel, coined that.
Yes.
Yeah.
This business with the Mothman had just happened. And he was fascinated with that. We talked a lot about that in the early days.
Oh, really? Okay.
He thought that was an ultra-terrestrial slipping through. And it apparently, as far as I know, from what I've read about the Mothman, never harmed anyone. Scared the hell out of them, but didn't harm anybody.
Right.
There have been cases. I know there was a case with Lee that scared the crap out of me, where I went to the door and he won't let me in. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? We got in finally, and this event occurred. I knew something was up when he was pouring a ball, Morton salt, and he was pouring a circle around us in salt. And it's like one of those, oh crap, what the hell is happening? Why is this room so cold? It shouldn't be this way. And then something manifested, and it was about as scared as, people say you got the fear of God in you. The fear of God was certainly in me. And I had my eyes closed. I thought, no, I don't want to see anything. I don't want to face this. And I was praying up a storm. And he said that was something that had slipped through a dimension and was wreaking havoc. And sure enough, there were a whole series at that time of unexplained, utterly violent events that had occurred. People didn't know why they'd attacked their family. So, like I say, there's a dark and light side of this. So that one just about drove me away, because I thought, and the whole business, if you read the whole thing, then you know about the car.
Yeah, can you tell that story?
Yeah,
That's
I
fun.
went there and things weren't different and not right, and I kept feeling strange, and I felt a heavy pressure on the back of my neck and my shoulders. And I finally said, I got to get out of here. This is just not right. Something weird. And I looked over at one of his cough. He kept coughing from the Oddfellows Lodge in his room because he liked to freak people out who were from sort of the community. So I looked over that thing and I saw a face in it. I thought, that's it. I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm done for this day. So I made my excuses that I wasn't feeling well and I left. And I got in the car and I started it and it took off by itself. And there was nothing I could do to control it. And I was beside myself. I did not know what was going to happen. It sailed down a hill and crossed the stream. Now, that's significant. The water broke it connection. And all of a sudden it's like, boom, the car stopped. I'm literally shaking. I don't even know. And I thought, I've had enough of all this. That's enough. I'm out of here. No more. And I didn't go back for, I think, about a month or so. And finally I thought, well, I owe the man the decency of writing him a letter and telling him what happened. And he'd already figured out what had happened because he had a fellow who was apparently jealous of me who could project really well. And was not a credible person, not a nice person either. So he was literally messing with me. And I actually ran into this guy later on. Now, if you do this kind of stuff with the worst of intent, it finds you. Everything you do will find you because, as Lee said, it's like a liquid universe. You can pee in one end of the pool and swim away, but eventually it'll find you.
Right. Whatever you
It's
do
gonna
is going
be
to come back to you.
Yeah, because it's a closed environment,
Right.
like an aquarium. And this guy started heavily drinking. And when you heavily drink, you might as well kiss your psychic stuff goodbye. Also, Lee taught said it's time for you to learn to protect yourself. And we began a whole series of trainings on how to do that protection work. And turns out I needed it for a while, but he kind of burned himself out. You cannot abuse yourself with drugs and alcohol and be any kind of magician. You can't do the lucid dreaming. You cannot enter shamanic consciousness. I've heard, I get 3/4 drunk and then I go into shamanic consciousness. I'm sorry, I'm not buying that.
What
You
about
may think you have.
what about the ayahuasca stuff though? The DMT and people doing
Psychedelics.
That? Like what's your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't recommend it. In all honesty, I could not recommend that anyone go that route. It's like jumping ahead of yourself, because what you do when you learn to do this slowly is you develop the emotional capacity to handle what happens. If you take the drugs, then it shoots you right up to the top. And you may have visions and you may have different things that happened, but you're not emotionally capable of coping with them.
And it's just uncontrolled.
It's uncontrolled. If you take it slow, if you move gradually towards this, you'll know how to control it. Same thing with spirit work. I see these poor souls, God bless them, with their little toys, going into some really, like a former mental hospital or some kind of thing. You have no idea what's in there. And you probably are not capable of coping with whatever it does come after. If it does come after you, I feel sorry for you, because you won't even be able to get it off. Let me give you an example. I got called to a college dorm in a small college one night because, quote unquote, you know about this stuff. So I went, I walked into this dorm room. There wasn't a stick of furniture that wasn't shattered. I looked around. I thought, oh, God. I said, what happened here? Apparently some of these young ladies were playing with a Ouija board. And something went really wrong. I said, where are they? They're in the hospital. Apparently one of them just went off her rocker. Mm-hmm. The best thing you can do is clean this place up. And I hope they learned their lesson. Because something did come, and something did take its pound of flesh, to use, what is it? Shakespeare's pound of flesh they took. Mm-hmm. And they paid for it. Paid for it with their health, and they paid for it with their mental stability. I would, it's like the spectrophilia. There's one fellow that got into that, and he was all into it, and he'd found his love of his life in non-corporeal form. And last I heard, he was still in the mental hospital.
Whoa.
No hope of recovery. Very sad. But that's how I feel about that kind of stuff. If you move gradually, if you evolve into it in a slow, deliberate fashion, being careful, you'll get where you're going.
And
you really will.
And is it best to have someone like Lee with you to kind of guide you into that world as like a master apprentice kind of relationship?
Yeah. I will say this, you got to be careful anymore with this, because there are a lot of people out there that aren't exactly ethical. Yeah. Tony and I have done a whole talk on how to look for a spiritual teacher. And there are things there are things that are just red lights that should go off in your head immediately. If somebody wants you to give them money, if somebody needs sex from you, if somebody actually had one person say, oh, you have to enter the great rite with me. No, I'm not doing that. But you'll never know the depth of, yeah, I will. I understand. No, thank you. No, you'll have to somehow make it without that.
The great rite being probably some kind of sexual favors. Thing.
Yeah. Nope, no great rites today. Thank you very much.
So
not for you.
So what would your thoughts be on someone, say like Aleister Crowley, that was very much, I mean, you talk about a drug addict.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, seriously into all this kind of sex magic and really just pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
Someone like him, I mean, it sounds like that he would be on the other side of this kind of tradition.
He would.
Yeah.
And he left a trail of just human destruction all around him.
Right.
You ever read about some of his followers, how they ended up?
Yeah. Yeah, I have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm not saying he didn't have some genuine experiences. I'm not saying he didn't tap into that it was all, a lot of his was, guy was good. He was a great showman. And he even someone who is a showman occasionally will hit the right button, so to speak, and things will happen. But he sure hurt a lot of people in the process.
That is true.
Including himself.
I mentioned Lee's boys. This was these ghosts, spirits. I guess. Yeah. What was his relationship to them? And you actually saw one, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saw Hans Andreas.
What were their names? They had some interesting names.
Yeah, they did. They were like companions. Lee had been involved in the spiritualist movement. In that way, he was a little different than some of the other powwows I've met, but he was very much involved in the spiritualist movement. So the idea of a spirit familiar was very comfortable for him. And I really think they served that purpose for him. Most of them, they just kind of wandered around with him. There was nothing remarkable. He knew when danger was around because they'd run. they were scared too. When this thing came, this negative thing from the other dimension, he said he first knew something was wrong because all of them were gone. They'd fled the house. They knew they couldn't stand up to that kind of thing.
They skedaddled.
They skedaddled, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was almost like friendly guys. They were like little boys from the neighborhood who would come over, although they were adult spirits. But there was no, they were just companions. They would tell him stuff. They would go hunt things for him. They would help him locate people. And to an extent would protect him. That's the role they served.
How did Lee first get into this stuff? I know you mentioned that he was atypical for a Pow Wow doctor, and that he came from a highly educated background.
Yeah.
Whereas most Pow Wows, you said, were farmers or tradesmen.
Yeah. He was very well educated. He had been an academic. When I knew him, he worked for the state as a historian. He's got into it through his family.
Okay.
His grandmother, there was some mix-up and some question about his paternity. So his grandmother sort of took charge of him, and she raised him. If you can find a copy of his book, it's an interesting read. It's a combination of magic, his coming out as a gay person, and believe you me, that freaked a lot of the local people out when that book came out.
That freaked him out even more than he was a Pow Wow doctor at the top of spirits,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
And didn't do much for his relationship with his wife.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine.
And I felt bad for her. She suffered. When he first moved over to Carpenter Street, after he moved out of her house, he was like a kid in a candy store. And one of my college roommates was living with him. And he had said, "You don't realize what he's doing. He's trying to indulge everything he's always hoped to indulge. And they're all kind of crazy people coming over." So at the end of the book, there's a part of a dialogue between me and Lee about, you know what you're doing is bad. You know you're going to get hurt. And he knew it. He just was sowing his oats, so to speak. That's one thing about Lee, is he was very much when you think about a spiritual teacher, he had a whole nother side to him. I was so glad when he told me he found me physically unattractive, because I was not. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I was not his type, but I was worried about him. I was afraid he's going to bring somebody home who was going to hurt him. And sadly, his death probably could have been prevented. He had a couple old characters living with him who saw him sitting in a chair and didn't realize that he'd had a stroke, and didn't call the doctor. So by the time his son came and found him, he was too far gone, and that's how he died.
Jeez.
And just as bad as that is that his family arranged a very quick sale of all of his stuff, including his notebooks, including his library, his charms, his stuff, all gone in a matter of an hour or two.
Would you have loved to have had some of that stuff?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'd have driven all the way. I was living in Virginia at the time. I would have beelined it down there, but I didn't know. And it was just like the family didn't like this aspect of his personality, and they just wanted to get it out of their sight as quick as possible now that their father was gone. I think his son still lives in that old house. Um, but his original house that I was in with him, uh, that I used to see him for the first part of it, has been bought by a couple or something. They fix it up. You can barely tell it's uh, somewhere. I think there's pictures of it I put up on the web of what it looked like, and it was a true hex house. It faced east between two running bodies of water, and the door had two screens on it so that you had to enter through body, mind, and spirit.
It's so tragic that that happened, and kind of in a lot of similar situations, just the level of disrespect, and that anyone from any other kind of denomination of established religions, no one would ever, it seems like, get rid of their spiritual artifacts. But whenever anyone is into any kind of magic or folk system that actually, you're actually engaging, one-on-one with the supernatural, that it's seen as lower somehow, or it's not respected.
Yeah, this leads me to a question, Jack, and we asked Jake Richards about this too. I mean, do you see now kind of more like the rise of a real right-wing kind of evangelical Christianity that is inimical or sees this folk magic tradition as something evil?
Oh yeah.
Has that become more and more of a problem as the years have gone by?
Is it actually less tolerant now than in the past?
Right.
I think it is. I think people have gone back underground. They've gone back underground. They're a lot quieter than they used to be. No one knows how this is going to go. But they're, as one lady said to me, he said, I could lose my children. In a divorce proceeding, this could be thrown up in my face, be declared an unfit mother. It's also helpful. I mean, I've had to kind of be careful about how much I talk about it and with whom. Because, it's not what your average professor does.
Right.
But I keep at it. I keep trying to reach out, and I keep learning. Still have plenty to learn. Still have plenty to experience. For a long time, I really avoided getting involved with people who needed help because I didn't know how to handle it all. I wasn't skilled at it. I didn't know if I get sucked into something that would harm me or the people I loved. And so it took me a while to sort of say, I can safely help people and protect myself.
Okay.
And that's what you really got to be careful of. A lot of people have very best of intentions, but you can always tell the people who are not skilled at this because they get sucked into. Sometimes you've got to be careful. There are a lot of what I call vampires out there. People who are emotionally disturbed to the point that they will attach themselves to you, milk you dry of all your psychic energy, and it's never enough for them. So you have to be very, very careful about who you take on in terms of helping. And that's why I always say to people, I'm not your teacher. I never will be your teacher. I'll point you in the right direction, but I'm not going to teach you. Because it's just, I don't know this person, and I have to be careful about them.
It's a lot of responsibility.
If I think that they're parasitic in nature. They don't mean to be, but they are. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah.
We've all, I think, probably
psychic vampires. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they are really out there.
Yep.
Some of them are very sad people, but there's nothing you really can do to help them.
Right.
And they won't help themselves.
Right. And part of it, I guess, is that they're just not aware.
No,
they're not aware that they may be that.
There's Do you know Dorothy Morrison? Does that ring a bell?
No.
Dorothy Morrison sort of works is sort of the more witchy aspect, but she's a funny lady. She and a fellow called Merv Sellers have this wonderful dialogue they do called talking about yebuts. And a yebut is somebody who you offer some sort of spiritual help to, and they go, yeah, but it doesn't apply to me. And that's one of the clearest things you can do is like, well, have you tried it? Yeah, but that doesn't work. Okay. All right. Fine.
Have you been asked to do like bad things for people? Or do you
Yes.
normally turn those down?
I try to talk them out of doing it.
Yeah.
I had a woman come to me, very nice woman, and she was a friend, who was really angry at this man, who felt this man was hurting people and wanted me to create a kill root, something that would do him in. And my wife's sitting there and her friend is sitting there, and I finally said, okay, I'll do it. And I made one right in front of her, and I gave it to her, and I said, every time you squeeze this, you're going to cause him pain. Every time you stab it, and if you do it enough, you'll kill him. Here it is. And my wife went, what on earth have you done? And I said, this is a good person. She's not going to keep doing this. And sure enough, in 2 weeks, she called and said, I don't want this thing anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. What do I do with this root? And I said, take it and bury it under an oak tree or throw it in the river. Salt water preferred. Drown it in salt water or bury it in an oak tree. Give it back to Mother Earth. Because once she thought I'm actually inflicting this guy with pain, her better nature took over. And she decided, I don't really want this to be part of what I'm doing as a person. And that's the approach I try to take with people, is I try to not, first of all, not enter into their anger, not enter into their revenge set. Because it's going to get me too.
Yeah. Like you said, it'll bounce back. Yeah.
I've done a few negative things. They've all worked, but I've ended up paying a hell of a price for it. So in my mind, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, it's better to not go there into that. Yeah.
And if you're mad enough, if you feel like you really got to do this, then do it. Have no remorse about it, and accept what comes. Mm-hmm. And if you're okay with that, knock yourself out. But it will come.
One of the last things we probably want to get to is the Granny Woman.
Oh, yeah.
So can you give us kind of a background of her and that tradition? Okay.
I met her through her granddaughter. I worked at the University of Virginia, and that's an expensive school, so my meager savings ran out pretty quick. So I ended up in the kitchen, and I met this young lady and we got talking, and she said, oh, my granny does this sort of thing, blah, blah, blah. Would you like to meet her? Yeah, sure I would. You bet. So I went out there and met this little soul, just as pure as she could be. Strong mountain woman. No nonsense person. You instantly respected her. And I went to see her about 2 or 3 times. And she could do the most amazing thing. She could call the birds from the trees. She'd hold up her finger, and a wild bird would fly down, light on her finger. She'd talk to it, she'd kiss it on the beak, and then send it on. She never fed them. She never did any kind of reward system like you would think you'd do with a trained animal. But her energy was of such a nature that they came to her, which I just thought, you felt like you were in the presence of someone really holy. I had the same experience when Patrick Don Moyer and I went to Mountain Mary's grave in Pennsylvania. Mountain Mary was a 18th century powwow, the mother of the powwows of the Ole Valley. I got up on that little mountain, which was on private property, and it was like stepping into a blissful paradise. It just took over. The energy was so strong. My own great grandmother had that energy, and she had been they call it midwife. Said she brought 300 to 400 babies into the world, and she literally had the capacity to walk into a room full of angry, arguing, yelling people, didn't say a word, just sat down, and within seconds they'd stop fighting. Pretty soon they were hugging each other. Pretty soon they were crying on each other's shoulder. She had some kind of radiant capacity that I think was brought about by a purity of spirit. I've heard other people talk about this phenomena with holy people, saints and the sort. But I think, this was definitely had this woman in Southwest Virginia had this capacity. She also talked about, fighting negative things. Like the first time I'd ever heard of a witch ball, which is a animated projection of negativity sent after someone. And her daughter told me about that someone had sent one after her, and they caught it and buried it as it was coming up the hall. This all sounds, I'm sure, pretty far-fetched. But at that point, I'd seen enough things that I didn't question it. There are a lot of things out there that we haven't got a clue as to how they really happen. And it's not all hallucination.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I think we've always been much more as beings than the simple things we're told we are.
Yeah.
We worry so much about dying, we don't even know what it is to be alive.
Yeah.
I mean, to get on philosophical on you, but we really don't.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a whole other level of things that we can tap into, but for some reason, I think most people choose not to. And I think that materialism has really contributed to that. And I mean, science has brought us a lot of great things, but at the same time, it's diminished the world of the spirit.
Yes.
And that world that humans have inhabited for millennia.
It's only one explanation of what happens in the realm of consciousness.
Right.
It's right. It is, if it's testable, that's really excellent. But that may not be all that's there.
Unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of utility in us not recognizing our divinity. And a lot of people are able to exploit us because of that.
Well, sure. If you can tell somebody they're basically nothing, that they're an incorrigible sinner, that they have no true value, that God doesn't really accept them except if they're only do this, that, and the other, you got yourself a really good slave.
Yeah.
And somebody you can just manipulate like crazy.
So what traditions did Granny come from? Did her practice come from?
They were mountain Pentecostals.
Okay.
And there were people in the community who weren't certain about how they felt about her doing what she did. Most of what she did was simple healing. They were burns, cuts, the standard kind of bruising. She was not a bone setter. There were bone setters. People who would jerk a bone back into place, but I don't know if she had that kind of strength. She could come up with herbs. She knew how to work with children's illnesses like measles and chickenpox, that kind of stuff. So she performed that role and that of a counselor. She was very much a counselor to people who would come with their problems. And as far as I knew, she was well liked by the congregation she belonged to. They saw her as a very holy person they could consult with.
Yeah, I mean, in that time, in her lifetime, that's how it was.
Mhm.
That's the striking aspect to these traditions. The Granny Woman and also Pow Wow is that it's within this Christian context.
Right.
It doesn't divorce itself from it. And in the last, I'd say, few decades, Christianity has kind of just tried to divorce itself from a lot, well, especially Protestantism. But it's really tried to divorce itself from a lot of these kind of magic traditions because they're afraid of the word magic. When for centuries, it was
They
just something that was a part of it.
And if you think about when you watch a minister lift his hands in invocation, he's practicing magic.
Right.
When he lays his hands in blessing, he's practicing magic. Physically, he's not doing anything from a scientific standpoint. All those are ritualistic, magical things. Now, I have upset people on occasion by saying that. Oh, no, it's different. Okay, show me how it's different. Well, it's in a Christian context. Okay, you just kind of missed the point. He's practicing magic. You just don't recognize it as such.
Yeah.
When I dealt with here in Bowling Green, I dealt with a family, and I had a professor call me and said, I belong to this church. There's a family that's brought something home that's wreaking havoc in their home. The minister tried to go out there, and it's worse now. And the sad truth is most ministers don't have a clue how to deal with this stuff. And they actually do make it worse in a general sense. Because they don't half believe it themselves. He said, would you please talk to these people? So I did, and I thought, I don't really want to get involved, but I will. So they called, and they were wonderful, solid Christian people. Their son had gone on a heritage quest to Africa and had brought home a mask, tribal mask. Most of that stuff is tourist junk, but apparently this one was not. And the mother, while trying to dust it one morning, touched it, and it jumped her.
Mm.
And she started having visions, and she started having all kinds of things happening in the house. So when I heard this, I said, well, where's the mask now? We got rid of it. Strangest thing, we took it to the Goodwill, and this white man came up behind us and said he'd give us whatever we wanted for it. I thought, really? Okay. What did he know, and why did he know that you had it?
Yeah, that was interesting when I read that in the book. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
I said, here's some things you can do. You can clean, there's a house cleaning, spiritual house cleaning, that kind of stuff. I gave him all those instructions, hung up the phone. I thought, well, that's that. No, it wasn't that. About 6 weeks later, I got another call saying, please come out. Please help us. It's getting worse. Crap. Okay. So I got my divining rods, because people want to see things. If you say you feel something, unless they can see it happen independent of you, they're probably not going to believe you. But I get out there, it's a beautiful home, pictures of Jesus on the wall, Bibles everywhere. We talked, we prayed. I took it strictly from the Christian context. Then I went around the house with the rods. I reached one point on the wall near the kitchen, and they spun like a helicopter, really fast. So I grabbed them, and I said, what was here? Well, that's where we hung the mask. Okay. Now, if they'd been sensitive to it, they would have picked up that the children were afraid of it, and the animals ran from it. That should have been a clue right there not to hang that thing on the wall. But What happened then was I moved through the house and I got to a back closet. And I opened the closet and those things spun again. And I'm thinking to myself, don't magnify their fear. Don't do anything to get them upset. So I went and I got my holy water. I anointed them with oil, with holy oil. And I went over to the spot on the wall and I blessed it. I cast out. Then, and there were children in the house. This was making me crazy. There were children in the house. They didn't make a peep, but they were there. I got back to the closet. I raised back to cast in, and this little girl goes, "What if it's Grandma?" And I looked over at the lady of the house, and she looks me right in the eye and says, "Do it." It was all I could do to keep from laughing.
It's not Grandma.
Don't like Grandma, huh? Okay. So I did the blessing, and I'm thinking all the time, gee, I hope this works. I really hope this works. So we went out, we had more prayer. I blessed the living room. I blessed each room. And that worked, apparently. Thank goodness for that. But I'll never forget the, what if it's Grandma? Oh, God.
You know, when you mentioned the guy buying the mask from them, this mysterious guy, and we were talking about root doctors, you mentioned how these politicians would go and they would consult the root doctor, this very famous root doctor, I believe, in Memphis.
Yep.
And, I mean, is there a link between some people in political power and being into this stuff?
There was a character in D.C. was charging $5,000 at a time, and the senators and Congress people were going there. So much so that he got on the FBI's radar, and they kind of showed him to the edge of town.
Huh.
Can you imagine what that would have done and how that would have appeared in the Washington Post?
The scandal.
Oh man. People seek occult help with.
I mean, that's the thing, is that that you've even got politicians, people that are our leaders that are, that we're supposed to think of them as practical people, but they're into all this.
Well, I love the way McTeer described it, and because I said, well, what if I don't believe any of this? He said, doesn't make any difference. In fact, you're easier to get than the others. If I do something to you, you'll try to pretend it's not happening. Pretty soon you'll be a mess. Whereas the local folks just come and have me take it off, and they're done.
Yeah. Yeah. It made me think a little bit about Papa Doc Duvalier and in Haiti, and how he was also a voodoo priest.
Yep.
And so he used that as a way to maintain his power.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of these old-time root doctors were a figure of power in their community. They did not book a challenge easy. They would come out swinging. And there's some terrible stories of someone trying to take over for somebody, and what happens, usually someone dies.
So it's almost like contested, how we'd have like a contested area of like a criminal group for some kind of racket or drugs or something like.
Yeah.
It's like, this is this root doctor's neighborhood and his territory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stay off of it.
Right.
That's a different kind of person than most of your hoodoo practitioners. Most of them are a little old lady or man who can help you get better, who could pull a spirit out of you, who could clean out your house, but would never hurt a soul.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably 97% of them. You hear about the others, but 97% of them are just good people, excellent people, kind. There's a wonderful man in Memphis now. He's a pharmacist. He's in his 90s. Of course, he doesn't run his pharmacy anymore because he's lost his sight. His name is Mr. Champion. And I had the privilege to meet him. And the minute he reached out and took my hand, I felt the incredible power. He had the ability to move into you, to check you out. Mm. And I sat down with him and we talked. And when I left there, I felt altogether better. I felt calm because he was the real deal. He may still be alive. I don't know. Because that was like maybe last year that I was, or the year before that I was there. Cool. Memphis has its own tradition. Tony Cale is somebody you should talk to about that.
Oh, we want to talk to him.
We've really been trying to get him on the show.
Yeah, we want to talk to him.
He could put in a good word for us.
Yeah.
Okay, I sure will.
Jack, this has been excellent. I've really enjoyed our time together. Can you tell people where they can get the book and also what's next on the slate for you?
Okay.
Speaking of Tony, that is.
Speaking of Tony, the book you can find, best place to hunt it for is on Amazon or any used bookstore. I've got about 20 copies of the 2000 printing. There was 2,000 copies initially printed. I've got about 20 left because the publisher went under, and I just bought his stock.
Does Aroma G have any in stock? Because I could direct.
Yes, Aroma G has them.
Yeah, if you're in Nashville, Aroma G and off Donaldson Pike, they have them there.
I have to say that Aroma G is probably one of the nicest stores.
Yeah, I agree.
They're really cool.
I've ever been in.
Yeah.
He is a prince of a fella to work with. He really is. Nicest. He and his partner are the nicest people. Can't say enough nice things about him. What Tony and I are working on now is we signed a contract with Llewellyn. We were approached at Mystic South in Atlanta last year by one of their book agents to see if we would want to do something. So we wrote a proposal on the supernatural in American folk traditions. And we're in the process of writing that now. Tony's focusing on the hoodoo and the Kundismo of the Southwest. And I'm doing the Appalachian and the Pow Wow sections. And what we're going to do is talk about the supernatural as it fits within those traditions. And what surprised me is that Llewellyn bought the idea of a semi-academic book. Most of their stuff is kind of lighthearted and it's a lot of it's very good, but it's written in a non-academic way. And what we proposed was a combination of the academic along with the popular, and they bought it. So we signed our contract, and we've got till April to get it to them. So that's what we're doing now. I'm running down a lot of old newspaper clippings where people have had contacts with a root doctor or a Pow Wow doctor from all the way back in the 1860s, and it appeared in the paper. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're up to now.
Cool.
Very nice. We'll have to get you both guys on for that to talk about that. For sure. All right, Jack. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming.
Truly. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, he knows the Memphis tradition better than anyone I know.
Yeah, I follow him on Facebook and Twitter, and he's always posting all kinds of old advertisements and
talks about stuff here like around Nashville too.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Good guy.
All right. Jack, stay on the line for us. We're going to close out this section, and guys, we'll be back to close out the show on Conspirinormal. Welcome back to Conspirinormal, guys. We're going to close out the show. That was a rather kind of extended interview, but a really good one.
Yeah, that was great.
With Jack Montgomery. I had the pleasure of meeting Jack at a folk magic festival here in Nashville back when I was passing out flyers trying to get people interested in the Strange Realities Conference.
Was I gone or I was just working?
You were... I think you felt bad or something was going on, or I think you might have been... I don't quite remember what it was. Heather actually came out there that day.
If you guys can't tell, Adam is now sick.
Yes, it's switching back and forth. Yeah, I've been not feeling very well today, but I'm still here, so the show must go on. So, any thoughts about that interview before we kind of close out?
Well, it was absolutely fascinating, and it was just a cool overview of kind of three traditions and very strong personalities within those.
Yep.
And I thought the kind of the documentary nature of it, of having these long conversations and preserving a lot of this like folk traditions straight from the mouths of the participants is really cool aspect of the book too.
Man, that's priceless. Have you gotten far into the book?
Yeah, I'm about halfway.
Okay, yeah, it's a great one. I highly recommend it. Let me give it to me real quick. So, what's by it is called American Shamans: Journeys with Traditional Healers by Jack Montgomery. So, you guys check that out. All right, so this is episode 296. We are heading towards episode 300. And please, guys, if you are interested in being a part of our listeners-only 300th episode, please hit us up at conspirinormal@gmail.com, or you can hit me up at Adam Sane on Facebook,
or Twitter.
Our Twitter is Conspirinormal. You can hit us up there, or on the Conspirinormal Facebook page as well. Also, don't forget the YouTube channel. Get us to 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. That would be nice. And Sophiel can tell you about Patreon.
Well, you can find us at patreon.com/conspirinormal. We're making one-time donation at conspirinormal.com. But yeah, please contact us and let us know what you want to talk about. And you can be on Conspirinormal.
Yep. Yeah, episode 300 coming up very, very soon, guys. All right, that's it. Next time, Mark Anthony Wyatt is going to rejoin us here. We're going to talk about book 1 of his series on the Spirit of Cornwall. So join us then on Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/conspirinormal, or leave a one-time donation at conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.